All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly OPI API meeting. So I'm going to start off. We've got the agenda today. We're going to talk about PyDPU first. There's a request from Mersha to kind of go through that. And then we'll go back into the network mapping model and start looking at some of the things that we can start entering there. So with that, Mersha, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can go ahead and walk through the PyDPU things that are going on. Just as an FYI, I know that RTech has been working on PyDPU, so I know there's some recent changes that have gone in. But go ahead. Mersha? Can anyone hear me?
I think he's on mute.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, go ahead then.
Let me check.
Yes, sorry, I was unable to unmute. Harsh is going to present and ask the questions.
Okay.
More so.
Yeah, sure. I'll just quickly share my screen if that's fine. Please confirm once it's visible. And,
yeah, we've got it. It's up.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So it's nothing much from my end, but we are just, I was trying to look at the SDK design as a generalized way of implementing it as an SDK and as a CLI. And there are two things that I came across. One is the PyDPU versioning, and second is the design as a whole. So by versioning, I see that at least in OPI API proto, we are just copying the version proto directly to the V1, folder in the PyDPU repository. And I feel that there should be some, API mismatch or changes, or there's some kind of an ineffective versioning in place. I mean, one reason is that when I see this guy, I mean, let's say for OPI API, I see that there is a V1 alpha 1, generation for the protos. But the same thing getting copied directly in the V1, directory. And this may lead to some kind of versioning mismatch. And, like as a developer who will be using the SDK frequently, or even for the CLI maintainers, that's going to be some problem, right? So one idea was to release PyDPU as per the version. Like if there is a V1 version for Protos, we can have a V1 release, and if there's a V1 alpha one, then we can have another release, and we'll maintain separate branches as well. So I just wanted to clarify before I move into the SDK design, because like the design is quite dependent on this factor. So if anybody has anything, you can just we can just discuss now.
Yeah, I think that's something I've noticed too. As we've been working on this, we've got some protobuf that are still saying that they're alpha and some that are V1. Just a view to the team, should we just go ahead and start everything off at V1 instead of V1 alpha, or do we want to only use V1 alpha maybe for things that we haven't agreed to collectively? Once we've got an agreement on certain ones, we should move them to V1. So is there any thoughts on that from the group? Okay, I will try to put together a versioning proposal and put it out there and see if we can get any feedback that way from the PR reviewers, etc. But my thought is maybe we only use the V1 alpha when we're still reviewing and we haven't fully agreed to or brought in a new API. And then once we bring it in and everybody's okay with it, we move it to V1.
Can we make sure that the version is software readable, right, for every API? I think we should just make that a baseline requirement that any OPI API can read the version out in a very easy way. So that there's going to be a billion versions running around.
Right. Okay.
Right. I mean, you know, if like the SDK design, when I was going through when I was trying to design it, I feel that even if I give the version during runtime, that's going to make the code more complicated, and it will be not very much readable to maintain. And uh, like having separate branches for versions will result in better maintainability and easier copying. Like we can have a CI/CD mechanism where any like if there's any change in the V1 or V1 alpha in OPI API repository, that can get reflected directly to the PyDPO as well, and we can have quick builds. Like let's say it's PyDPO dash V1 dash 001 and so on. For other branches, it will be PyDPO dash V1 alpha 1 dash 00 something, etc.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's a good point. We've been kind of loose on how we want to do it. As we start to formalize, we want to do that. The other thing that we are also doing, just so you're aware, is one of the goals, and we have it as an issue in the API work group, is to take the generated files and basically put them into a separate repo so that you
Right.
don't have to auto-generate them inside of the API repo, and that's part of the check-in and everything else. That would be
Right.
part of the CI/CD process. It would put it into a separate repo. And again, there's where the versioning will come in very well.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, we can discuss this, and then possibly we can like come up to some conclusion. Then I can start working on it.
Sure.
And on the second option is that when I looked at a few commits for the PyDPU, and I see that like what we are doing right now is we are just trying to write some wrappers on top of the protos, right? I mean, that's a good way to do, because we want the SDK to be very user friendly, so that any editor or any plugin can quickly read the whole construct and give better suggestions, and the developers can quickly coordinate, right? So I see that in some way it's kind of like we are writing wrappers on top of it. But I had one proposal, and one is that we can auto-generate the code. We can just take the proto and translate it to a YAML or JSON and auto-generate the classes, even for the messages and RPC calls as well. And using that same technique, that will be a one-time, one big code, which will require it will require maintenance, but not at such levels that we have to write everything by hand, even if somebody adds new APIs or calls or messages, right? So using an auto generator will give editors more flexibility. I have some designs in mind where we can work on that. And with this, I mean, this will reduce the this whole process of creation of classes, the manual creation of classes. The only thing is, one challenge I see is that since we'll be auto-generating the classes, there's some issue, in naming the RPC wrappers. Like if we want to give a better name for RPC, so in that case, we can manage our map sort of thing, like a CSV file, but we can think of that as well. So this is like another proposal to the community. If anybody has any better ideas or suggestions, we can work out on a good solution.
Do you have any examples of what you're thinking in terms of the auto generation, right? I guess I'm trying to understand, from my perspective, I'm trying to understand what do you want to accomplish with the auto generation, I guess.
So for the time being, I don't have. I just quickly came up with some kind of thought. But I can raise a PR soon, which will have the code and like how we can auto generate better classes. Like it will be like a wrapper on top of Proto, but it will be readable by any editor or any IDE. So that PR would help in better understanding of how things can go.
Okay, yeah, that would be good to, if you can put that together and then bring it forward and kind of go through it, that may help me and may help others in the call to understand the objective with that.
Sure. I'll come up with that. So I didn't develop because I was waiting for the versioning part. I mean, how we are deciding the version. Because to be honest, I didn't want to go with the runtime implementation. That will result into more complex code base and it will be complicated. So I just thought of asking you, the community, the first one, and proceed with the second one if we can.
Right. No, it's a good point. We've been kind of lax in terms of the versioning that we've put on it with the V1, V1 Alpha. Some of the things that are V1 have been pretty well beat on, and the things that are V1 Alpha are still kind of just, well, here's a concept, but we haven't really come to ground.
Yeah. Like another reason of auto generation is that, to be honest, I see that like in these generated classes, like NVMe, I'm not very sure on how this whole class works. I mean, the purpose behind it, but to be fair, we can just pass a request parameter rather than creating a request internally, and that can be achieved by an auto-generated code. So, like in the near future, if somebody wants to change a definition of the remote controller service or create NVMe path or bring some changes, it will require less definition changes over the course of time.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
like it will be.
I think it would be good to have something where you've gone through it so we can see what it looks like and what the process is.
Sure. Yeah, I'll come with the design and I'll submit some kind of diagrams as well as a PR for that.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that's it from my side. And yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the overview and the presentation. If you it's up to you if you want to share the slides. They will be in the recording, but if you want to share them, we can post them to the site also.
Sure. So can I post in the meeting chat or is there any link?
You can post them on the meeting Slack channel.
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll just get them uploaded into GitHub with a PR.
Cool.
All right. So the next thing that we wanted to cover was going back into the network mapping that we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Oh, Mark, before we go into that,
Sure.
I have one comment.
Sure.
And this isn't the job I chose, but it's the job I have, is to bring up the issue around the naming in some of our repos, like PyDPU, GoDPU, the Ansible DPU, and make sure that we need to go through and rename them based on the agreements that we've made in the TSC to either use XPU or not or not talk about devices at all. But we need to go through and rename those functions.
Okay,
what
so
is
this is moving it from DPU, IPU, or whatever BU to XPU.
Yes, yeah. So anywhere
Okay.
it's a DPU, it does an IPU, just needs to be, I mean, the easiest thing to do is just make it XPU. And if we want to pick, Go XPU is also not very descriptive. So if we want to go and pick a different name, this is the time, because it's going to be painful to go through all this. And I'm offering to go and make these changes, but and like I said, this isn't fun for me. So I should make the marketing team do this, but they can't. So I just want to make sure that I do it once and I don't make everyone mad. And then from then on we can have it be done right.
So, yeah, this sounds like the discussion we had a few weeks ago over the entire repository structure. So, yes, and that was not a fun discussion in the
Yeah.
TSC.
Yeah, so I'll just put it in here that this is not, it's not urgent, but the longer we wait, the more the more wasted time it will be to fix it. So
Yep.
so I just drop it in here. I'll try to propose something in the TSC to go in and whatever despecify everything in the repos and then go from there. But just thought I'd
Okay.
announce it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can help you go through the different repos and put together something too, Dan, if you need
Oh yeah, I would love
help
help
there.
for sure.
Okay.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay. So yeah, repo renaming is another topic. Great. I got that captured. So what I wanted to do is go back and take a look at what we were discussing around the networking view. So let me share. There it is. Always have to find the share screen on this. So what we've got here, I don't want to make it too big. Hopefully everybody can see this. This is what we were talking about last time. Trying to expand out the different groupings for some of the capabilities where we want to start mapping things. I know that actually I haven't gotten any comments back yet, but I've put together this into an addition to our networking description. I put this in the description in terms of, these are the groupings, these are some of the fields that we need to start flushing out. What do they look like? Does anybody see additional groupings right now that we need to add to this? If not, what I've started to do is to create the issues that align to these, and I'll bring up a couple of those so that we can go through them. So first thing I'll do is open the floor to any additions that anyone may see that we need to do with some of this. And let me open up the participants in case someone raises their hand. There we go.
I don't know if I would break out Kubernetes networking like you have there, because I think that like the data plane API is a sort of a combination of your switch router mode and your policy, probably some QoS in there too, right? This sort of overlap. And I see this OPI API as an opportunity to make the Calico data plane API that we're using today a little more generic. So we could go to OpenShift or Cisco Isovalent and say, hey, look, we figured out how to offload Calico, and we're using the OPI API as a means to do that. And it's connecting to the Calico data plane API. Like, I feel like that's the usage of this API in the context of Kubernetes networking. Same thing with like EVPN, right?
Right.
Is that what it's doing is not sort of specific per se to Kubernetes, but where Kubernetes is doing some routing, we can we can push that into a special data plane. So I don't know. I just think it would be simpler if we kept the OPI API kind of implementation independent. So, I wouldn't have anything on Kubernetes or Sonic or Firewall or OVS or anything like that whole section at the bottom. Instead, it would be like, it's all just sort of generic high level stuff, but, for sure. Well, for example, something I explicitly want to do is when we push the patches back for OVS, instead of having OVS call P4 runtime, I'd much rather have it call the OPI API for bridging and for neighbor discovery. So like that would be a really valuable use case of this API. And I think OVS would prefer to, use a potentially standard API versus P4 runtime. Maybe they're fine with P4 runtime. I don't really know. But I just think it would be, better to have. And if this API that we're doing is sort of implementation agnostic, we haven't baked in anything specific to Calico or to Sonic, then it could be better. So I'm actually proposing that we simplify this, make our lives a little easier. Maybe just prune the bottom three there, and sort of tap into all that at a different level.
Okay. Miriam, before I,
Yeah, sorry. Firstly, I'm on a bike, so I apologize if you can hear me or hear my bike.
Can hear you. You're on a plane. Nice. We can hear you.
So I think we're getting too bogged down in the details here, to be honest with you. Like
Okay.
I view the things like NIC mode, switch router mode, Kubernetes networking as like high level themes. And the next layer is to go and break those out into real things that we go and work on. And to be honest with you, like I would focus on the most basics. So I'd start with something like the NIC mode and the switch mode as the things that we just knock out of the park, because they're going to be common to everybody. Like looking at something like Kubernetes networking at this stage and trying to break it down into a mind map is, I think, going off in the wrong direction. Like I would just fix what we have here, unless there's something majorly missing, and say, let's move to the next phase, which is let's start working on the basics and fundamentals, defining those, breaking those down, and then let's look at the more complex stuff after that.
yeah, so basically start with NIC mode and switch mode, and then worry about the other sections later. That's what
Yeah.
you're getting at. Yeah. No, I agree with that. Well, what we tried to capture in this is that these are all of the things eventually that we're going to have to deal with. But yes,
Yeah,
agree
no, and I
completely.
agree. Yeah, I'm just saying let's start. Let's go. Let's not get too bogged down in the high level detail at this stage, and let's try and figure out the smaller bits so we can build the bigger bits.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that. And my point of pruning the bottom is to say, hey, let's just take that out and not worry about it. And let's focus on the other stuff. Is similar. So yeah, I want to focus on switch router mode. That's the area that I want us to have, because I want to use this both for OVS and for Kubernetes.
Okay.
So yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
if we don't want to argue too much about this and just talk about, all right, let's go, let's pick which one we want to jump into first. Let's go.
So I'll do some pruning on this and update it. But I still want to keep it captured somewhere for at least what we've fleshed out so far, and we can adjust it later. But okay. Agree completely. So let me switch to the issues that I've started to enter, because I want to make sure that we're capturing everything. So what I've done to try to look at things from that perspective is here we go. Give me a second. I'm trying to find the right window. It's that one. There we go. So what I've done, and I started this out, Miriam, because I want to get your feedback on this since you're on the call, is I started looking at it from the standpoint of if we look at it from NIC mode, we wanted to find the port configuration. So created issue 441 in here, which basically says, if you consider a physical type of interface, right, you're not going to be able to create or delete because the physical interface already exists. So we need to put together the CRUD model that will allow us to do update if we want to change parameters, get for things like statistics or status of the port, and then of course list the different information. And then you have a few parameters that you can actually tweak at a physical port layer. So I started with that one. Then I created the next issue on virtual ports, which basically says you got the full CRUD model. You're going to have a lot of the similar parameters. In a thread with Dan, he pointed out that there's probably some SRIOV and SIOV type operations that we need to configure depending upon how we create the virtual ports or devices. And then I got to thinking about it after creating the issue, and it's like, well, does it make sense to combine these two things into a single API where create and delete only apply to virtual ports, but you keep track of ports in a single port table or whatever the mechanism is that you want to keep track of it with. And you would also have SRIOV as being a optional parameter that you would configure for that particular thing. And then that starts out by trying to build the table up from, let's start out with the basic NIC, virtual NIC, and then start figuring out these are all the parameters that you would do at the basic port level. Then we would do like the switch layer. We would do a route set of issues, etc. Because you're going to want to add IP addressing and gateways, which I kind of I mapped it out with NIC mode, but a lot of that falls into am I running in a switch router as to whether or not I want to apply the different addressing techniques and set it up accordingly. Thoughts on how this maps out or comments? It's quiet. I'm guessing I did okay.
No, it's great. Yeah, no, I'll put a reference here. We have an existing open config schema for this that works just like you said, is like you can create these virtual ports and the SRIOV VF number is optional. And so that, sort of the default mode is kind of like QEMU type thing, where you're just, you can just, it's software, you can just add as many of these as you want. But if you are tying it to a VF, either doing VDPA or pass through or whatever, then you provide the parameter there. And so, this open config that we have, it's not setting the maximum number of VFs and all that stuff. That's separate. But once you kind of know what's available, then you can use the VF numbers to allocate new virtual ports that are accelerated. So in this issue, I'll put a reference to it that it's already out there on IPDK.
Okay. Yep. Anything we can do to start defining it, then we can actually start. If we can just pull it from IPDK or wherever, we'll just pull that into the API and then get everybody to take a look at it. So as we move forward with this, so the next things to start, and I'll start continuing to work on creating more of these issues. I'll start working on the layer 2 type functions. So I'll take a look at, what do you want to do when you're setting up bridges, IP addresses, how would that map into this? And then branch out from there in terms of, here's your gateway, here's your reference for when you want to start doing routing paths. Then VLANs, we'll add VLANs into one of the definition sets. BRFs, bridges, LACP, BFD, etc. All of those different pieces. And we'll branch it out. We'll begin with just NIC mode, switch mode. I'll make that clear in the write-up. And then we'll move into other areas once we get these worked through and worked and agreed to within the group. Does that sound like a reasonable plan, everyone? All right, I take silence as yes, that's a reasonable plan. Okay, so if you want to start looking at the issues or taking some of them on or making some recommendations for any other parameters, please feel free to start taking a look at the issues that are out in the OPI GitHub location. Add any comments that you see or different parameters. We'll start seeing what we can do to flush these out. We'll create probably a folder somewhere in the API stream and start either pulling the contributions in or adding the contributions into that so that we can get feedback and review from the teams here. Okay. That's pretty much all I had. I wanted to go through that, at least put that out there. I appreciate the feedback on the diagram, the mapping. We'll focus again on the first ones, and then we'll start expanding out into other ones. We'll just take it one step at a time. Miriam, I think you went off.
Yeah, no, that all sounds good. Sorry, I went off mute. I was thinking in my head.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, this makes sense to break these stories into break these epics almost into more definable chunks. So define would be like the design phase, then we move into implement, then test, then document, I guess. But you know, the most important thing is that potentially we have the definition of done, but we'll have to agree on that as a group, you know, for each
Correct.
of these issues.
Yep. So I'll continue to, I'll put out some more of the issue lists, and then feel free, please, to comment, provide any feedback or any additions to these things.
Awesome.
We'll try
Thank
to
you.
get things. Yeah, I'll try to get this kicked off and moving.
Hey
Sorry.
Mark, I have just one question. Like the end goal of the whole endeavor here is to actually move all the projects that use the different APIs out there in OPI to use the common API that will actually be defined by this process here, right? So, for example, if we have Cloud API or VPN Gateway API and projects that actually are using those APIs today, like OPI VPN Bridge, for instance, all those projects needs to actually move and use the newly defined common API that will be a product of the process that we are describing here. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, the end goal is to come up with, here's the common set, and the common set is what everybody agrees to, right? And it's generalized across XPUs.
Mm-hmm.
And then there can be extension sets that would be very specific to, say, a cloud use case or a telco use case or whatever. So it kind of follows that pattern, because we realize that, you know, we can't define every single possible thing into a common API that every single product can use. There's going to be extensions. There's going to be specific things that are based upon this particular use needs this particular set of parameters, and it's very unique to that. And it doesn't apply anywhere else.
Okay, so for example, if we take the EVPN Gateway API, is gonna, like the current API that we have, is that gonna be an extension, or is gonna be included in the common set of the APIs that we define here?
It could end up, the majority of it could end up in the common set, and then there may be some pieces that are extensions. We haven't gotten to that stage yet, but that's how it may flush out. Similarly with the cloud contribution, a lot of that could fall into the common set, and then there may be specifics that fall out.
All right, I see. But anywhere, bottom line is that either if we have like a fully common API or we need extensions, all the projects that actually use some OPI API today need to
Mhm.
actually adjust to the new models.
Yes, yes. Once it's all agreed to, and that's the key, is trying to get it all agreed to.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for
Yeah, and
clarifying
hopefully
that.
that will fit into the modular architecture you presented today as something that's pluggable at one of the layers, you know.
So say that again. I didn't get that. Sorry.
I said hopefully it would plug in to your modular architecture that you presented earlier on today at the TSC as another layer, you know.
Yeah. Let's see about this. Yeah. Hope so.
Fair.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions on this and the approach that we're doing?
One question. For example, the SRIOV setup, are you expecting we can set up the SRIOV from the DPU side through the out of band, or are you thinking this is the host side of the setup and define the API to be supported on the host side?
So I'm going to defer that question to Dan, because he's the one who suggested that we put it in there from the work they're doing with IPU.
Oh, yeah, this is all coming from the DPU IPU side. So the DPU IPU controls how many VFs or, you know, CDQs or however many, the number and types of devices that are being pushed onto the host. So the host just discovers that, you know, the maximum number of VFs or whatnot. So yeah, this API is, this particular API is meant for after all that's been set up by your, you know, DPU IPU management, to say this is the set of devices that are on the host. This is how I associate, you know, a virtual port from my Kubernetes or OVS or whatever. This is how I associate a virtual port to one of those hardware resources that have been configured. I think that there's probably another interface to be able to instantiate hardware resources. And we don't have a schema for that because it's very device specific. So, but we could attempt to attack that, right? But it seems like every device, even here at Intel, they all have their own different like constraints as to when and how you can slice up the hardware resources. So we kept that separate.
Right. Yeah. If we can actually set them up from the DPU side or XPU side, that's really great. And I think we just need to make sure all XPU vendors are aligned with this functionality. I usually set up the SRV from the host side. Not that I want to set it up from the host side, but sometimes or some case I have to. So
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. I think we should endeavor to do it. I mean, it should not be that hard to be able to say, all right, I have N number of devices and each device has, you know, X number of VFs and Y number of container dedicated queues, and, you know, should be possible to do that. But I don't have a schema laying around to do that right now. It's a config file in the different devices that we have. So, but we should definitely go for that. It is like the very first thing that you have to do to get these things to work.
right, exactly. Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or things that we need to discuss? I'll leave the floor open for a little bit.
Maybe a shameless plug to talk about what's happening in the um, provisioning and lifecycle forum. I know, Mark, that you're in there, but for others who aren't going, is that we've been trying to come up with a baseline set of things to provision and configure these DPU IPUs, and then Boris is working on a set of Ansible scripts that are currently calling into Redfish just to kind of do the basics of booting up and imaging these devices. And then I would expect that these Ansible scripts would then start to branch into this OPI API that we're defining here. So we can have Ansible scripts to go and, set up Kubernetes cluster, or, start infrastructure as a service, networking and software, right? So I think it would be, I think it's an important development that's related to this OPI API is to, and it's related to PyDPU and these other, and GoDPU as well, in that, if we can, have this sort of two-pronged approach where we agree on a bunch of specs and APIs, and then we have a set of scripts that are almost like the golden model of like, all right, this is how you drive a device that is compatible with these specs and APIs, then I see us being very successful in trying to standardize all of this. So just thought I'd mention it here for folks that aren't following that meeting. That's it's like Tuesday at 9 or 10, I forget. I think it's at 10.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good one to go to. I don't always get to go, but I try to drop in when I can. Okay. If there is nothing else, I'll give everybody back roughly about 10 to 13 minutes. And thanks everyone for joining. We'll try to get back together next week and see what progress and what other topics that we have to cover. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.